Why did the room go quiet the moment her name appeared on the flight board? Captain Lena Hartwell noticed it before anyone spoke. The pause, the subtle shift in posture. A few pilots glanced up, then away, as if eye contact might somehow confirm an assumption they hadn't yet voiced. She sat at the far end of the briefing table, shoulders relaxed, hands folded, listening while her name lingered on the screen like a question no one wanted to ask out loud. She had learned early that silence made people uncomfortable, especially when it came from someone they didn't know how to categorize. The briefing officer cleared his throat and continued, outlining the recon mission in a voice practiced enough to hide uncertainty. Mountain patrol, low-threat environment, minimal expected contact. The words sounded neat, too neat. Lena felt it immediately, that quiet friction in her chest, the one she'd come to trust more than any instrument. She didn't speak. She rarely did in rooms like this. Across the table, a senior pilot leaned back and muttered something under his breath. Not loud enough to challenge, loud enough to be heard. Someone else smirked. The nickname followed her the way it always did, soft, dismissive, almost affectionate. Pedal, as if she were something light, something harmless, something that didn't belong in the sky they all believed they owned. Lena kept her eyes forward. She had spent her entire life learning how to let assumptions pass through her without sticking. Growing up around flight suits and briefing rooms, she understood something most people didn't, that confidence was often just noise. And noise had a way of getting pilots killed. Her Apache waited for her outside, silent under the pale morning light, tail number worn, panels scarred from years of service. She touched the fuselage as she always did, palm flat, fingers spread, feeling the cold metal like a pulse beneath skin. It grounded her, reminded her where she belonged. The mechanic watched her quietly. They always did. "You good, Captain?" he asked. She nodded once. "I always am." As the rotors spun up, Lena settled into the cockpit, the world narrowing to familiar shapes and tones. Screens flickered alive. Systems hummed. The aircraft responded the way it always did, not like a machine, but like something that recognized her. That was the thing no one ever understood. She didn't fly helicopters. She listened to them. The mountains rose beneath her as she lifted off, ridgelines folding into one another like quiet secrets. The radio chatter was minimal, calm, routine, almost convincing. Almost. Her sensors picked up nothing unusual at first. Heat signatures where they should be, shadows where they belonged. She cataloged it all with patient precision, transmitting updates in a voice so steady it barely sounded human. But something felt wrong. At exactly 9:14, the warning tone cut through the cockpit, sharp, intrusive, undeniable. Unidentified airborne contacts. Lena straightened. Her hands moved before thought caught up. Radar painted faint marks on the edge of her display, fast, high, closing. She swallowed once. "Command," she said evenly. "Confirm inbound contacts." The pause that followed told her everything. "Raptor 9, the voice finally replied. "We're tracking 8 fast movers, bearing 280, closing." 8. Against 1. Her Apache couldn't outrun them, couldn't climb above them. Backup was too far. Evade was the only word command could offer, but Lena knew better. You didn't evade predators by running. You survived them by making them doubt. She dipped the nose and descended into the canyon, letting stone swallow her silhouette. Shadows wrapped around her aircraft like camouflage older than war itself. "Negative," she said softly. "I'm not running." Silence followed, heavy, afraid. "I'm going weapons hot." And somewhere high above the Blue Ridge Mountains, 8 pilots who believed they were hunting something fragile began a countdown they would never hear. How does a helicopter disappear from the sky? The first jet dove through the morning haze expecting panic, a clumsy turn, a desperate climb. Instead, the radar blinked. The target vanished. Lena flew low enough to feel the terrain breathe. Pines rushed past beneath her skids, rock faces blurred by inches from her rotors. She wasn't hiding. She was becoming part of the mountain. The jet overshot. Her targeting reticle locked before the pilot understood his mistake. The Hellfire launched clean, decisive, almost gentle. 31 seconds in, the sky tore itself open. The explosion echoed through the canyon, a violent punctuation mark on a sentence the enemy hadn't finished reading. Lena didn't react. She was already moving. The second jet tried to flank her, confidence shattered but training intact. She let the terrain break his lock, then rose just long enough to remind him helicopters could still bite. Another missile, another absence where something lethal had existed moments before. 2 down. The radio chatter above her fractured into disbelief and anger. Formation dissolved. Patterns broke. Good, she thought. Confusion was a kind of gift. They adapted quickly, splitting into elements, compressing angles, textbook maneuvers designed to overwhelm. Lena listened to the wind instead. It curled through the canyon, whispering where sound would travel, where shadow would fall. She moved accordingly. When two fighters descended together, she led them towards stone towers jutting from the valley floor like broken teeth. They committed to the wrong line. She slipped between the rocks and rose behind them. 2 missiles, 2 fireballs. 4 down. Her breathing stayed slow. Her mind quieted further, narrowing into something sharp and ancient. She wasn't thinking anymore. She was remembering. Her father's voice, her mother's lessons, the way storms gathered strength by staying silent. The fifth jet dove fast, desperate, trying to crush her with speed alone. Lena stopped. Hovering so low, the dust spiraled like smoke around her rotors. The jet committed. Her chain gun roared. The sky filled with debris. 3 left. Now they kept their distance, firing missiles from beyond visual range. Smart, dangerous. She used the mountain like a shield. Stone absorbed fire meant for her. She slipped through gaps barely wider than her wings, letting missiles die against ancient rock. When the smoke cleared, she emerged like something the mountain had decided to release. 2 more launches, 2 more voids in the sky. Only one remained. His voice cracked over the emergency frequency. I surrender. Lena paused just long enough to feel the weight of it, a fighter pilot surrendering to a helicopter, to her. Maintain altitude, she replied calmly. Follow my heading. He obeyed. 13 minutes. That was all it took to turn belief into ash. Why did no one cheer when she landed? The Apache touched down first, rotors slowing with unremarkable patience. Then the fighter jet followed, humbled, escorted, silent. People poured from hangars, from offices, from wherever instinct pulled them. No one spoke. They just stared. Lena stepped onto the tarmac with her helmet under her arm, expression unreadable. She felt no triumph, no rush, just a strange, hollow quiet, the kind that follows something irreversible. Her commander approached, disbelief etched into every line of his face. 8, he asked softly. 7, she corrected. 1 surrendered. The words rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. Someone asked how she'd done it. They underestimated me, she said. That was all. By nightfall, classified lines burned hot. Analysts replayed footage frame by frame. Generals flew in without insignia. Somewhere deep inside rooms without windows, doctrines began to crack. When General Artemis Collins finally sat across from Lena, her voice was measured, careful. You didn't just win, she said. You broke something. Lena nodded. She already knew. What happens when instinct becomes doctrine? The hangar beyond the black-striped door felt unreal, prototypes, simulations, futures that hadn't existed a week earlier. Lena walked through it quietly, aware that something larger than her had begun moving. She trained pilots the way she flew, without ego, without noise. She asked questions, forced awareness, broke habits gently, then rebuilt them stronger. They failed, often she let them. Failure was information. Months passed, simulations turned into victories, theory became repeatable truth, helicopters stopped being prey. One evening, watching her pilots below, Lena felt something unfamiliar rise in her chest. Hope. Why did she never talk about the cost? Because legacy wasn't loud. Years later, young pilots would fly terrain the way she once did, listening, predicting, trusting silence over speed. They wouldn't know her voice, only her influence. Lena never became the storm. She simply refused to be blown away by it. And sometimes, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. How did she stay so calm when the sky itself seemed to tilt against her? The first explosion hadn't even finished echoing through the canyon when Lena Hartwell was already moving again. She didn't watch the fireball bloom behind her. She didn't listen to the stunned silence that followed on the radio. She had learned long ago that looking back wasted time, and time, up here, was the only thing she could never afford to lose. Her Apache skimmed the canyon floor, rotors slicing air so close to the rock that the vibration crawled up her spine. The mountains rose on either side like witnesses who had seen this kind of violence before and learned not to flinch. Above them, the remaining jets adjusted, their confidence cracking just enough to reveal something far more dangerous underneath. Fear. Lena felt it too. She would have been lying if she claimed otherwise. But fear didn't own her the way it owned them. She had lived with it since childhood, folded it into her instincts, learned how to let it sharpen instead of shatter her. Right now, it made her focus narrower, clearer, almost gentle. Raptor 9, command cut in, voices overlapping now, urgency leaking through professionalism. Confirm hostile down. Confirm, are you still engaged? She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes tracked movement on the display. 4 signatures still high, fast, repositioning. I'm still here, she said at last. That was all. The second jet came in low and aggressive, trying to make up for surprise with speed. Lena recognized the move instantly, a pilot trying to reassert control, to remind himself that fighters ruled the air. She let him believe it for half a second longer than necessary. Then she slipped sideways into shadow. The jet overshot, roaring past her position, too committed to correct. Lena rose just enough to clear the rock face, the targeting reticle steady as if guided by something deeper than muscle memory. Another missile, another absence. Her breath stayed even, but something inside her tightened, not with pride, not with adrenaline, but with a quiet, creeping sadness. Every kill carried weight. She had been raised to understand that survival didn't make you righteous. It just made you alive. The radio above her fractured into sharp bursts of foreign language, clipped and urgent. They weren't hunting anymore. They were trying to understand. The remaining jets split formation, executing a maneuver so clean it would have impressed her under different circumstances. Too high, too low, a net closing. Lena dropped deeper into the canyon. The walls closed in, jagged and unforgiving. This was where less experienced pilots panicked, where instincts screamed for altitude and open sky. Lena did the opposite. She trusted the mountain more than the air above it. Her parents had taught her that terrain wasn't an obstacle. It was a language, one you had to learn before it mattered. The first pair descended together, confident that compression would corner her. She guided the Apache between 2 stone towers, barely wide enough for her rotors, the canyon tightening like a held breath. The jets followed, misjudging the turn by a fraction of a second. It was enough. She pivoted, locked, fired. The explosions overlapped, thunder folding into thunder, debris spiraling down like dark confetti. 4 gone now. Half their number erased not by brute force, but by assumption. Lena felt her pulse quicken for the first time, not with excitement but with awareness. The fight had changed. The enemy was learning, and learning enemies were far more dangerous than arrogant ones. A warning tone screamed through her cockpit. Missile inbound. She ducked behind a rock formation the size of a cathedral. The missile struck stone instead of steel, the impact rattling her teeth. Dust filled the air, choking visibility, turning the world into fragments of gray. She didn't wait for it to clear. She moved. Another missile followed, then another. She threaded the Apache through a narrow slit in the canyon wall, rotors inches from scraping rock, the helicopter responding to her touch like a living thing. The missiles recalculated too late, slamming into the mountain with concussive force. The silence that followed was brief. The fifth jet dove from above, desperate now, abandoning tactics for velocity. Lena recognized the maneuver instantly. It relied on panic, on the belief that the slower aircraft would flee. She didn't. She stopped. Hovering so low the ground erupted beneath her, dust and debris spiraling upward like a summoned storm. The jet committed, gravity and momentum locking it into a path it couldn't escape. Lena squeezed the trigger. The chain gun's roar filled the canyon, a relentless, mechanical thunder that tore through the jet's fuselage. It disintegrated midair, fragments raining down like metal hail. 3 left. For the first time, Lena felt the weight of isolation press in. The sky felt enormous, empty. She was alone in a way few people ever experienced, not just physically, but emotionally. No one up here could share the burden of her choices. Every decision lived and died with her. She thought of the briefing room, the smirks, the nickname. Pedal, a fragile thing pressed underfoot. She almost smiled. The remaining jets pulled back, circling high now, launching missiles from beyond visual range. Smart, controlled, terrifying. This was the kind of engagement helicopters weren't meant to survive. Unless the pilot refused to play by the rules. Lena used the mountain like armor, like a blade, like a mirror. She let the terrain confuse their sensors, break their locks, bend their expectations. She surged upward just long enough to bait recalculation, then dropped back into shadow. Missiles died against stone. Smoke curled through the canyon, thick and acrid. Through it, Lena emerged like an apparition, calm, deliberate, lethal. Her final hellfires were already armed. She pivoted around a cliff face, acquired one jet, fired. Before the explosion faded, she used the mountain's bulk to shield herself, swung wide and locked onto the next. 2 launches. 2 silences. Only one remained. For a moment, nothing happened. The last jet kept its distance, circling warily, as if unsure whether the helicopter below was real or some kind of trick born of fear and exhaustion. Lena felt a strange ache in her chest, not pity, not mercy, but recognition. She knew that posture, the hesitation of someone who had seen the world change too quickly to process. His voice broke through on the emergency frequency, stripped of bravado, raw and human. I surrender. The words hung in the air, fragile and unprecedented. Lena didn't respond right away. She hovered there, listening to the wind curl through the canyon, feeling the weight of what had just happened settle into her bones. 13 minutes of combat, a lifetime of consequences. Maintain altitude, she said finally, her voice steady. Follow my heading. He did. As they turned toward friendly airspace, Lena felt something loosen inside her, not relief exactly, but a quiet release. The fight was over. The sky felt different now, quieter, as if it too was trying to understand what she had just proven. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt tired. And somewhere deep within that fatigue lived a fragile, dangerous thought she hadn't yet allowed herself to examine. This would change things. And not all change was kind. Why did the silence feel heavier than the fight itself? The moment the last fighter fell into obedient formation beside her Apache, the sky seemed to exhale, not in relief, but in recognition, the kind that comes when something irreversible has just happened and the world hasn't caught up yet. Lena Hartwell kept her eyes forward as she guided both aircraft toward friendly airspace. Her hands were steady on the controls, but inside, a delayed tremor finally stirred. Not fear, not triumph, something quieter, something closer to grief. 13 minutes. That was all it had taken to erase 8 lives, rewrite assumptions, and carve a scar into the doctrine of aerial combat. The number echoed in her head without emotion, the way facts do when your mind refuses to let them become memories too soon. Raptor 9, Command said carefully, as if afraid to startle her. We have you on radar. Confirm, one hostile escorting. Yes, Lena replied. He surrendered. Another pause, longer this time. Copy, the voice said, though it didn't sound like belief. As the mountains fell away behind her, Lena felt exposed for the first time since the engagement began. Open sky had always made her uneasy. Too much room for expectations. Too little room for truth. The airfield came into view slowly, heat shimmering above the runway. She noticed movement near the hangars, too much for a routine return. People spilling out of doors, figures stopping mid-stride. Even from this distance, she could feel their attention pressing upward. She set the Apache down with the same precision she always did. No flourish, no rush, just controlled descent and a soft bounce as the landing gear kissed concrete. The rotors slowed. The world rushed back in. The surrender jet landed moments later, trailing her like a shadow that no longer knew where it belonged. When it rolled to a stop, armed security swarmed it instantly, weapons raised, voices sharp. The pilot stepped out with his hands high, shoulders slumped, not in shame but exhaustion. Lena powered down her systems methodically, one switch at a time. It felt important not to rush this part, to respect the transition from survival to aftermath. When she finally stepped onto the tarmac, helmet tucked under her arm, the noise faded again. Conversations died mid-sentence. A wrench clattered to the ground and no one noticed. They stared at her, the way people stare at something that contradicts too many internal rules to process at once. Major Hale approached first. His posture was rigid, but his eyes betrayed him, wide, searching, unsettled. I've reviewed the initial telemetry, he said slowly, but I need to hear it from you. She waited. 8 engagements, he asked. Confirmed. 7 destroyed, Lena said evenly. 1 surrendered. The words rippled outward, a few gasps, a quiet, disbelieving laugh that died quickly. And you took no damage, Hale pressed. She shook her head. No, sir. He looked at the Apache behind her as if expecting to see scorch marks appear retroactively, some physical evidence that would make this easier to understand. When none materialized, his shoulders sagged slightly. How, someone else asked, not demanding, almost pleading. Lena thought about the canyon, the wind, the moment she stopped moving and let the jet commit to its own destruction. She thought about the years of being ignored, underestimated, spoken over. They thought they knew what I could do, she said finally. They were wrong. That answer didn't satisfy anyone, but it was the only honest one she had. The rest of the day passed in fragments, debrief rooms, medical checks she didn't need, questions layered on questions, some technical, some philosophical, all circling the same impossible center. By evening, the base hummed with a low, restless energy. Analysts replayed footage frame by frame. Engineers argued quietly over performance envelopes. Pilots gathered in clusters, voices hushed, glancing toward her whenever she passed. Lena felt strangely invisible in the middle of it all, like the storm after the lightning, present, but no longer the focus. She was summoned just before dusk. The conference room was small, windowless, secure. General Artemis Collins stood inside, hands resting on the table, eyes sharp and unblinking. She didn't offer a seat at first. "Captain Hartwell," she said, "do you understand what you did today?" Lena met her gaze. "I survived." Collins studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Yes, but you also broke an assumption that has governed air combat for decades." She tapped the table, bringing up a holographic replay of the engagement. Trails of light marked missiles, turns, collapses. The sky reduced to data. "You didn't win by speed," Collins continued, "or altitude. You won by anticipation, by using terrain as a weapon, by letting your enemy defeat themselves." Lena said nothing. This wasn't new to her. It was just new to everyone else. "People are going to want to make you into something," Collins said quietly. "A symbol, a miracle, a headline." "I don't want that," Lena replied. "I know," Collins said. "That's why this matters." She pressed a panel on the wall. A door slid open with a heavy, deliberate sound. "Follow me." Beyond it lay a hangar unlike any Lena had seen. Prototypes lined the walls. Simulators glowed softly. Engineers and tacticians froze when they noticed her, whispers spreading like a current. "This facility exists because someone once asked a question no one else was brave enough to," Collins said. "What if helicopters weren't prey?" Lena felt something tighten in her chest. Not fear, responsibility. "What you did today," Collins continued, "can't stay an anomaly, not if it's real, not if it's repeatable." She turned to face Lena fully now. "I'm asking you to help us find out." The weight of it settled slowly. This wasn't about recognition, or promotion, or rewriting history books. This was about turning instinct into something others could learn, about carrying the burden of proof. Lena thought of the surrendered pilot's voice, the way it had cracked, not from weakness, but from understanding too late. "If we do this," Lena said carefully, "people will die trying to copy it." Collins nodded. "They already are. The difference is whether they do it blind." Silence stretched between them, not awkward, honest. Finally, Lena exhaled. "I'll help," she said, "but I won't lie to them. This isn't about being fearless. It's about listening harder than everyone else." A corner of Collins' mouth lifted. "That," she said, "might be the most dangerous doctrine of all." Later that night, alone in her quarters, Lena sat on the edge of her bunk and stared at her hands. They looked the same as they had that morning, steady, unremarkable. She felt no pride, no victory. Only the quiet understanding that whatever she had been before today, overlooked, underestimated, unseen, no longer mattered. The sky had noticed her now, and it would never forget. When did the weight of what she'd started finally settle in? It wasn't during the first classified briefing, or the second, not even when she stood inside the secure hangar for the third time, watching engineers argue over schematics that only existed because of what she had done in the canyon. The weight didn't arrive with applause or rank or quiet awe. It came later. It came when the questions stopped being about what happened and started being about how to make it happen again. The hangar was cold in the mornings, the kind of cold that crept through boots and into bones. Lena liked it. Cold sharpened things. It reminded her of early flights with her mother, standing on cracked tarmac before dawn, breath fogging the air while rotors slept overhead. The first group of pilots arrived without ceremony. 12 of them, hand-selected, decorated, confident in the way people get when they've survived long enough to believe their instincts are permanent. They watched her carefully. Not with hostility, with curiosity, with the quiet tension of people trying to reconcile reputation with reality. She didn't introduce herself with her record. She didn't mention the canyon. She simply stood at the front of the briefing room and waited until the room stilled on its own. "The hardest part of this," she said finally, "won't be learning new maneuvers. A few brows furrowed. It'll be unlearning the idea that speed is safety. That got their attention. She didn't lecture, she asked questions, forced them to describe what they noticed first when under threat, what they ignored, what they assumed would always be there. Most of their answers sounded similar: altitude, velocity, escape routes. She nodded, then rewound the canyon footage without commentary. Let the silence do the work. The first simulation broke them in under 6 minutes. Jets swarmed, missiles tracked. Every helicopter was eliminated before anyone had time to adjust. Frustration bled into the room like heat. They looked at her, waiting for correction, for reassurance. Lena reset the simulation. "What did you hear first?" she asked. No one answered. "What did you feel?" she pressed. "Not in your hands, in your chest." That changed the room. Training days stretched long. Nap of the Earth flights through hostile terrain. Blind navigation through turbulence designed to disorient. Target windows that vanished before pilots finished blinking. They failed constantly. Some tried to compensate with aggression, others with caution. Lena corrected neither outright. She let consequences teach where words couldn't. One pilot slammed his helmet down after a brutal run, frustration cracking his composure. "This isn't flying," he snapped. "This is guessing." Lena met his eyes calmly. "No," she said, "this is listening." Weeks passed, something shifted. They stopped chasing the jets, stopped reacting to noise, began anticipating patterns, using terrain not as cover but as conversation. The first time a team survived longer than 10 minutes, no one celebrated. They just stared at the screen in disbelief. By the end of the second month, they weren't surviving anymore. They were winning. General Collins observed in silence from the back of the room as a 4 Apache team inverted a simulated 12-fighter assault, eliminating every target without losing a single aircraft. When the simulation ended, no one spoke. Collins replayed it, then again. "This isn't a tactic," she said finally. "It's a doctrine." That night, Lena stood alone on the catwalk overlooking the hangar. Below her, pilots moved differently now, lighter, sharper, less rigid. She saw it in the way they walked, the way they spoke to their aircraft like partners instead of tools. "You changed them," Collins said beside her. Lena shook her head. "They changed themselves." Collins studied her. "Do you know what this means?" Lena watched a pilot rest his hand against a helicopter's fuselage, the way she always had. "It means," she said slowly, "what happened in those mountains won't be a miracle anymore." The general nodded. "It means it becomes standard." Later alone, Lena felt the weight again. Not pride, not fear. Responsibility. Because once you teach someone how to survive, you also teach them how to walk back into danger. And that knowledge never leaves your hands clean. She lay awake that night listening to the distant hum of rotors, wondering how many lives would one day trace their survival back to her, and how many losses would too. The sky had changed. And change, she knew, never asked permission. It only demanded honesty. What happens when the world finally believes you, but you're no longer sure you believe in yourself? The requests didn't arrive loudly. They came quietly, folded into encrypted channels and sealed folders, written in careful language that tried not to sound like urgency. Allied commands asking for observation rights. Research divisions requesting Lena's presence. Strategists wanting to pick her brain, as if what she carried could be extracted cleanly and shared without cost. She said no to most of them. Not out of arrogance, out of caution. Because belief, once unleashed, had a way of outrunning responsibility. The program expanded anyway. New simulators, new aircraft variants, new layers of secrecy. Lena watched it grow from something intimate and fragile into something large enough to cast a shadow. She spent her days teaching and her nights replaying the canyon in her mind, not the kills but the moments between them, the pauses, the choices that could have gone another way. She slept less. When she did sleep, she dreamed of hovering too low, rotors slowing, dust rising, only this time the jet didn't commit. This time it waited, adapted, learned. She woke with her heart racing, not from fear, but from the quiet realization that enemies evolved faster than doctrine ever could. One evening, General Collins handed her a new file without preamble. "Operational test," she said. "Real airspace, live opposition." Lena didn't open it right away. "You're not asking," Lena said. "No," Collins replied. "I'm informing." They stood in silence for a moment, the hum of the hangar filling the space between them. "I'll fly," Lena said finally, "but not to prove anything." Collins studied her. "Then why?" "Because if this is going to exist," Lena said, tapping the folder, "it needs to fail where I can see it." The mission took them back to the mountains. Different range, different names, same unforgiving terrain. Lena led a small team this time, younger pilots who trusted her with the kind of faith that scared her more than any missile lock. As they lifted off, Lena felt something she hadn't expected. Doubt. Not in her ability, in the idea that she should still be the one leading from the front. The engagement unfolded fast, faster than the canyon. The opposing pilots were smarter this time, less arrogant, more patient. They didn't rush. They probed, tested boundaries. Lena felt pride flicker as her trainees responded, not perfectly but intelligently. They listened, adjusted, survived. Then a warning tone screamed. One of the Apache took a hit, not fatal but real. The formation wavered. Lena reacted instantly, moving to shield the damaged aircraft, drawing attention, pulling threat toward herself. The old instinct took over, smooth and automatic. And for the first time since that day in the Blue Ridge, fear punched through her composure. Not fear of dying. Fear of being the reason someone else might. The fight ended with no losses, but the silence afterward felt different, heavier. The pilots landed, shaken but alive. The damaged Apache bore scars along its flank, visible proof that this wasn't myth, wasn't guaranteed. In the debrief room, no one spoke for a long time. Finally, one of the younger pilots looked at Lena, voice quiet. "We followed you because we trust you." The words hit harder than any accusation. Lena nodded slowly. "Then you need to learn when not to." That night, she stood alone on the tarmac, hand resting against her Apache's cold skin. She realized something she hadn't allowed herself to consider before. Her role was changing. She wasn't the sharp edge anymore. She was the hand shaping it. The next weeks reflected that shift. Lena flew less, watched more, corrected gently, let pilots make decisions without her shadow overhead. It was harder than combat had ever been. Letting go always was. One afternoon, she sat in the simulator observation room while a trainee froze mid-engagement, overwhelmed by conflicting inputs. Lena didn't intervene immediately. She waited, watched the pilot breathe, recalibrate, choose. The helicopter survived. Lena exhaled, a quiet release she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Later, Collins found her there, staring at the darkened screen. "You're teaching them restraint," Collins said. "I'm teaching them humility," Lena replied. "There's a difference." Collins nodded. "And what about you?" Lena didn't answer right away. "I'm learning it," she said finally. As the months passed, the program stabilized, doctrine codified, language softened around impossibility. Helicopters were no longer spoken of as prey, but neither were they sold as miracles. Lena insisted on that balance, because she understood something deeply now. The sky didn't change because she was exceptional. It changed because she refused to lie to herself about her limits. On the anniversary of the Canyon engagement, Lena flew alone at dawn. No weapons, no audience, just air and machine and memory. She hovered briefly above a ridge, dust rising, then lifted away without drama. For the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. Not because she had conquered the sky, but because she had learned when to step back and let others carry it forward. And that, she realized, might be the quietest kind of strength of all. Why does the quiet after everything feels louder than the moment that changed it all? Lena Hartwell never attended the ceremony. The medal was pinned to an empty uniform, photographed for records that would never be public, archived behind layers of classification that ensured her name would remain a whisper rather than a headline. She had been offered the chance to stand there, to accept it properly, to let the room applaud the moment history bent. She declined. Instead, she was already airborne. Dawn stretched thin across the horizon as her Apache lifted gently from the tarmac, rotors carving a slow, steady rhythm into the morning air. No weapons, no escort, just a quiet flight over familiar terrain, mountains softened by mist, valleys holding shadows like unspoken memories. This was where she returned when the noise became too much. Up here there were no expectations, no doctrine, no ghosts asking to be justified, just movement, wind, and the subtle conversation between pilot and machine. She flew low, tracing ridgelines the way she always had, letting instinct guide her rather than objectives. She thought about the pilots she'd trained, how they listened now, how they trusted silence instead of speed. She thought about the one who froze in the simulator and found his way back without her intervention. That had mattered more than any kill count ever could. The world below continued without her permission. New manuals printed, new acronyms invented, new debates sparked in rooms she would never enter again. Somewhere, strategists argued over numbers and probabilities, trying to quantify something that had never been about math. Lena knew better. The canyon hadn't taught her how to defeat fighters. It had taught her how to endure being underestimated without becoming bitter. She landed briefly on a remote strip carved into a high plateau, cut the engine, and stepped out into the stillness. The silence pressed close, intimate and honest. She removed her helmet and let the cold air touch her face, grounding her in a body that had carried more than its share of decisions. For a long moment, she simply stood there. She thought about the pilot who surrendered, how his voice had cracked not from fear, but from understanding that the rules he trusted had abandoned him. She wondered what he carried with him now, whether he replayed those 13 minutes the way she sometimes did, not as triumph, but as proof that certainty was fragile. We all live on borrowed assumptions, she realized. And when they fail, we either adapt or disappear. Lena returned to the Apache and climbed back inside. As the engine hummed to life, she felt none of the old tension. No need to prove anything. The sky didn't need convincing anymore. She took off smoothly, angling toward the sun, letting light spill across the canopy. The world felt wide again, not threatening, not impressed, just present. When she finally returned to base, no one rushed to meet her. No cameras, no speeches, just a few pilots working quietly, preparing for flights that would never make history but would still matter deeply to the people flying them. One of her former trainees caught her eye and nodded, a small, unspoken acknowledgement. Lena returned it. Nothing more was needed. She packed her gear later that day, slow and deliberate. Flight suit folded, helmet stowed. The locker door closed with a soft click that felt final without being sad. Before leaving, she paused in the hangar and rested her hand against the cool metal of an Apache's fuselage. A different aircraft, a different pilot would fly it tomorrow. That was how it should be. Strength, she had learned, wasn't about staying in the sky forever. It was about knowing when to land. As she walked away, the rotors of another helicopter began to spin, rising into the air with the same patient confidence she once carried alone. Lena didn't watch it lift off. She didn't need to. The sky was in good hands now. And somewhere between the mountains and the silence, a truth remained, quiet, enduring, unadorned. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.